I first started noticing the change in my granddaughter, Lily, about 6 months after my son Mark married his second wife, Elena. Before Elena came into the picture, Lily was a whirlwind of energy. 9 years of mismatched socks, messy braids, and a laugh that could be heard from 3 houses away. But lately, when they came over to my place in coastal South Carolina for our traditional Sunday dinners, that girl was like a shadow of herself. She would sit at my heavy oak dining table, her small shoulders hunched up toward her ears like she was trying to pull herself into a shell. Whenever Elena spoke, Lily would go dead quiet. It wasn't the polite kind of quiet you want from a child. It was the kind of silence that feels like a held breath. She stopped making eye contact with me, too. Her eyes, which used to be so bright and curious, were now constantly fixed on her lap or her plate. As a grandfather, you feel those things in your marrow. You know when a child is being good and when a child is being suppressed. That particular Sunday evening, the air in my house felt thick and heavy, despite the cool breeze coming off the marsh. My wife, Rose, had passed away 4 years ago, and these dinners were supposed to be the glue holding what was left of our family together. But as I watched Mark climb out of his truck and Elena step out with that practiced, sharp smile of hers, my gut twisted. Something was fundamentally wrong. Mark looked like he'd aged a decade in a year. He used to be a talker, the kind of guy who could spend 3 hours telling you about a single fishing trip. Now he barely looked me in the eye. He gave me a quick, firm handshake. No hug. No how's it going, Pop? And walked straight into the kitchen to help Elena with the bags they'd brought. Then there was Lily. When she climbed out of the back seat, my heart actually hurt. She'd lost weight. Her favorite denim jumper, which she used to fill out perfectly, was hanging off her frame. There were dark circles under her eyes that no 9-year-old should ever have. She looked haunted. "Hey there, Tiger," I said, reaching out to pat her shoulder as she walked up the porch steps. Lily flinched. She actually pulled away for a split second before she realized it was me. Then, she forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. A trembling, fragile thing that made me want to grab her and never let her go. "Hi, Grandpa," she whispered. Dinner was an agonizing affair. I had spent the afternoon making all of Lily's favorites. Pot roast with extra carrots, creamy mashed potatoes, and homemade rolls. Usually, she'd have 2 helpings of everything. Tonight, she just moved the food around her plate with her fork, making little patterns in the gravy. Elena did all the talking. She was a life coach or something of the sort, and she spent the entire meal describing how she had finally brought order and discipline to their household. "Lily is doing so much better with her new structure," Elena said, her hand coming down to rest firmly on Lily's shoulder. I watched the child go absolutely rigid. It was the way a rabbit freezes when it senses a hawk circling overhead. Elena's fingers didn't just rest there. They seemed to press down with a deliberate, controlling weight. "Tell Grandpa about your new evening schedule, Lily," Elena prompted, her voice sounding like honey poured over a razor blade. "I go to my room at 7 now," Lily whispered, her eyes locked on her untouched water glass. "And I stay there until 6 in the morning. No exceptions." 7 o'clock? I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. "The sun isn't even down yet. That seems a bit early for summer break, doesn't it?" Elena's smile didn't waver, but her eyes turned cold as ice. "Children need boundaries, Silas. Mark and I have agreed that this is what's best for her development. Haven't we, honey?" Mark just nodded, staring down at his plate like a puppet with its strings pulled tight. "Yeah, boundaries are important. Pop," I wanted to scream. I wanted to shake my son until his teeth rattled and ask him where his spine had gone. But I knew that if I pushed too hard, I might lose access to Lily altogether. So, I played the part of the dotty old grandfather and kept my mouth shut. The moment of truth happened during dessert. Elena was in the middle of a long story about a client of hers when I felt a small, cold hand brush against mine under the table. I didn't look down. I just kept my hand open. Lily's fingers were trembling violently as she pressed a small, crumpled square of paper into my palm. I quickly closed my fist around it and tucked it into my pocket, my heart thumping against my ribs like a trapped bird. When they left an hour later, Lily turned back at the very last second before getting into the truck. Our eyes met, and the look she gave me was one of pure, unadulterated terror. It was a plea for help that she couldn't put into words. I stood on my porch until their taillights vanished into the dark Carolina pines. Only then did I pull the note from my pocket. It was written in Lily's careful, looping third-grade handwriting, though some of the letters were shaky and smeared. It said, "Grandpa, look inside the old tool chest in the workshop, please, and you will see why I am scared." The workshop sat at the edge of my property, a place filled with the scent of cedar and old memories. My heart hammered against my ribs as I grabbed a heavy flashlight from the kitchen drawer and stepped into the humid night air. The workshop was dark and silent, and for a moment the rational part of my brain told me I was being a paranoid old man. But Lily's eyes, the sheer terror in them, pushed me forward. I reached the old tool chest, a heavy iron-bound box that had belonged to my father. I lifted the lid, the hinges groaning in the quiet space. At first, I saw nothing but the usual: rusted wrenches, jars of nails, and wood planes. But Lily's note had been specific. I began pulling everything out, clearing the bottom until I noticed a slight misalignment in the wood. I pried at a small seam, and a false bottom clicked open. Tucked inside was a weather-beaten leather satchel. My hands shook as I unzipped it. The first thing I pulled out was a stack of identification cards. I flipped through them, my breath catching in my throat. There was Elena's face staring back at me, but the names were all different. Elena Thorne, Elena Vance, Elena Miller. She had at least 4 different identities, each with a different history. Then I found the notebook. It was a small, spiral-bound thing, but the contents were devastating. On the first page, in tight, clinical handwriting, was a detailed list of my assets. Silas Thorne's house, $650,000. Life insurance, $250,000. Retirement savings, $300,000. Total $1.2 million. My entire life, every year of hard work, had been reduced to a set of numbers on a balance sheet. I flipped the page and the room seemed to tilt. There was a section labeled Timeline, 4 to 6 months. Underneath it, the notes became even darker. They discussed method TBD, listing options like medication mishap or fall during marsh walk. They had been studying me, tracking my daily walks, the times I was alone, and the specific pills I took for my blood pressure. But the real blow came when I noticed the handwriting changed halfway through the page. The clinical script was replaced by a looser, more familiar scrawl. I recognized those loops, the way the S trailed off. It was Mark's handwriting. My own son had written, "We need to move faster." He's starting to ask too many questions about the finances. The betrayal felt like a physical weight crushing my chest. The boy I had taught to fish, the man I had supported through every failure, he wasn't just a bystander. He was a partner in a plan to end my life for a payout. I didn't have time to grieve. I could hear the distant rumble of a truck. Mark must have forgotten something and turned back. My military training kicked in. I pulled out my phone and began snapping rapid-fire photos of every single ID and every page of that notebook. I hit upload to send them to my cloud storage, then immediately messaged Pete, a retired sheriff's deputy I'd known for 30 years. "Found something life-threatening. Look at the files I just sent. If I don't call you in 20 minutes, send the cavalry," I typed. His reply was instant. "Calling you now. Get out of there." I silenced the ringer just as headlights swept across the workshop windows. The gravel crunched under tires. I shoved the satchel back into the hidden compartment, threw the tools back on top, and killed my flashlight. I stood frozen in the darkness, the phone burning in my pocket, as the workshop door creaked open. I stood as still as a statue in the corner of the workshop, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The heavy wooden door creaked on its hinges, and the sound of voices, Mark's low mumble and Elena's sharp, clipped tones, drifted in from the driveway. Suddenly, the automatic garage door began to grind upward, and a sliver of yellow light began to crawl across the concrete floor, creeping toward the old boat like a warning I couldn't escape. The headlights of Mark's truck flooded the space, forcing me to squint as the two of them stepped inside. Their shadows stretched long and distorted across the floor, looking like monsters in the gloom. I stayed right where I was by the boat, my phone gripped tightly in my hand, trying to look much steadier than I actually felt. "Dad? What on earth are you doing out here in the dark?" Mark's voice sounded hauntingly normal, as if we were just two men discussing a fishing trip. I decided right then to stop playing games. "Lily asked me to check on something," I said quietly, watching them closely. I saw it then, just for a heartbeat. Elena's eyes narrowed, a flash of pure venom crossing her face before her pleasant mask was shoved back into place. She knew. She knew the child had talked. "I think you've seen enough, Silas," she said, her voice dropping an octave. I didn't answer with words. Instead, I held up my phone, the screen glowing brightly with the photo I'd taken of the notebook. "I've already backed this up to the cloud," I told them, my voice surprisingly ironclad. "And I've already sent it to people who know exactly what to do with it." Mark tried to laugh, but the sound came out like he was being strangled. "Dad, come on. You're confused. You've had a long day." "Confused about the fake IDs?" I shot back. "Confused about the notebook that lists my house as a line item and details a 6-month timeline for my accident? Or maybe I'm confused about the notes written in your handwriting, Mark?" Elena stepped forward then, shifting her tactics. She adopted a patronizing, overly sweet tone that made my skin crawl. "Silas, have you been feeling all right lately? Sometimes at your age, memory issues can be very concerning. Early dementia can make a person paranoid." "My memory is sharp as a razor," I snapped, keeping my eyes on both of them. "I know exactly what I saw, and so does the person I sent it to." I looked at my son, the boy I'd raised on that very boat behind me, and saw the truth in his posture. His shoulders were hunched, his arms were crossed tight, and his eyes kept darting to Elena as if he were a dog waiting for a command. For a split second, I saw a flicker of genuine guilt and desperation on his face before he shut it down. My son wasn't a victim of this woman. He was a willing partner in her scheme. The betrayal hit me harder than any physical blow ever could. "Mark," I whispered, my voice finally cracking. "Tell me I'm wrong." He opened his mouth to speak, but Elena grabbed his arm so hard he actually winced. "We should go," she said, her eyes fixed on me. "Your father clearly needs rest." Her polite facade finally shattered completely. Her smile turned into a cold, jagged edge. "Protected? You think you're protected, Silas? You're an old man living alone in the middle of nowhere. Accidents happen every single day." The threat hung in the stagnant air of the workshop, heavy and undeniable. She tugged Mark toward the door, and he followed her like a puppet on a string, never once looking back at me. I stood there in the silence until the sound of their truck faded into the distance. Only then did my legs give out, and I sank onto the stern of the boat, unable to hold my own weight. My son was helping that woman plan my death for money. They weren't going to stop. Elena's threat made that perfectly clear. This was no longer a family dispute. This was war. My phone buzzed in my hand. It was Pete, my old friend, trying to call me back. This time I answered. "Pete," I said, my voice rough and shaking. "I need your help. I need it right now." I didn't sleep a wink that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those notebook pages flashing in the dark like a neon sign. I could still see the cold, hard numbers and the timeline they had mapped out for my life. According to their plan, I only had 4 to 6 months left before I was scheduled to have an accident. As soon as the sun began to peek over the marsh the next morning, I was on a video call with Pete. His face was grim as he stared at the screen. I pulled up the cloud folder and showed him every photo I had taken, the fake IDs, the financial calculations, and the notebook entries in my son's handwriting. Pete's jaw tightened as he scrolled through the images. "This is bad, Silas. Really bad," he muttered. He zoomed in on one of the IDs that showed Elena's face under the name Elena Vance. He told me to hang on while he ran some checks. I watched him typing fast on another computer, his brow furrowed in concentration. A few minutes later, his voice dropped to a low, serious tone. He found that 5 years ago in Arizona, There was a woman named Elena Vance who had married a 72-year-old retired executive. Just 6 months after their wedding, the man supposedly fell down the stairs at home and passed away instantly. It was ruled a tragic accident, and Elena inherited every penny of his $2 million estate. After the funeral, she disappeared, changed her name, and moved east until she found my son. "So this is her pattern," I said, my voice feeling hollow and cold. "She finds men with money, marries into the family, and then makes sure an accident happens." But the most painful part was what Pete said next. He pointed out that Mark's handwriting was all over that notebook. My son wasn't a victim being tricked. He was her full-blown partner in this. Pete told me he had a contact who could help, an attorney named Daniel Brooks who specialized in elder law and financial crimes. Within an hour, Daniel called me. He was calm and measured, but he didn't sugarcoat the situation. He told me we had to move incredibly fast because Mark and Elena already knew I had found the evidence. If they are willing to carry out a plan like this, they won't hesitate to move up their timeline, he warned. Just as he said those words, my phone buzzed with a text from Mark. It said, "Dad, we need to talk about Lily. She's been acting very strange and anxious lately. Elena thinks she needs to see a specialist, so we've scheduled a counseling appointment for next week, Star." I stared at the screen, my blood turning to ice. They weren't just coming for me anymore. They were going after Lily, isolating her and making sure she couldn't tell anyone else what she knew. My fear for my own life suddenly vanished, replaced by a cold, hard rage. They were trying to silence a 9-year-old girl who had been brave enough to save her grandfather. I realized then that I was completely out of time. I wasn't just fighting to protect my house or my bank account anymore. I was fighting to save my granddaughter before they could break her. I drove to Lily's school like a man possessed, my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. It was nearly 3 o'clock, and I knew I had to beat Mark and Elena there. I couldn't let them take her home to that house of secrets after what I'd found in the workshop. When I pulled into the pickup line and saw Lily walking through the front doors, her face transformed the moment she spotted my truck. It wasn't just a happy surprise. It was a look of pure, desperate relief. She climbed into the passenger seat without a word, her backpack hitting the floorboards with a heavy thud. "How about we go grab some ice cream, Tiger?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light and steady. She nodded quickly, her eyes constantly darting to the side view mirror as if she expected her parents' car to appear and block our path at any second. We went to a shop downtown, a bright, noisy place filled with the sounds of laughing children and clinking spoons. I wanted her somewhere safe and normal. Lily picked chocolate chip, but she didn't eat it. She just sat there, her small hands shaking as she stared at the melting scoops. "Sweetheart," I said softly, leaning across the table, "you're safe with me. I promise." That was when the dam finally broke. Tears began to stream down her face, and she leaned into me, sobbing into my sweater. "Grandpa, they're going to hurt you," she choked out. She told me she had overheard them talking while she was supposed to be asleep. Elena had told Mark that I was in the way and that I was nothing to them. The most chilling part was why. Lily whispered that Mark owed people a lot of money, debts I knew nothing about, and he had told Elena he would do whatever it takes to get the cash to pay them off. For months, my 9-year-old granddaughter had been lying awake in the dark, pretending to be asleep while her own parents planned my demise. I knew I needed proof that the law would take seriously. "Lily, I need to record what you're telling me so I can keep you safe," I told her. She nodded, wiping her eyes with her sleeve. I pulled out my phone and hit record on a voice memo. In her small, trembling voice, she repeated everything. The threats, the cold calculations, and the desperation she lived with every day. When we finally walked back out to the parking lot, my heart stopped. Both of my front tires had been slashed. They weren't just flat. There were deep, clean, deliberate cuts in the rubber. It was a message. I told Lily to get back in the truck and lock the doors while I called the police. A young officer arrived and took a report, but there wasn't much he could do without witnesses. While we were still standing there, Mark's truck screeched into the lot. He jumped out, his face twisted with a mixture of guilt and fury. "You can't just take her without telling us," he shouted. I stood my ground, my jaw clenched. "Someone slashed my tires while we were inside," I said, watching his face closely. "Funny coincidence, don't you think?" Mark looked at the officer, then at the shredded tires, and for a second, I saw the shame flicker in his eyes. But then he just grabbed Lily's hand and pulled her toward his truck. She looked back at me one last time, her eyes wide with terror, before they drove away. That night, as I sat alone in my quiet house, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. It said, "Stay out of it, old man. The next accident won't be just a tire ******. They weren't hiding anymore. They wanted me scared. But as I looked at the recording of Lily's voice on my phone, all I felt was a cold, hard rage. I wasn't going to hide, and I wasn't going to fight this alone anymore. By Tuesday of the following week, I found myself sitting in a high-rise office in downtown Tampa, staring out at the sun-drenched bay. It was a beautiful view, but I couldn't appreciate it. My mind was too full of the images from that dark notebook. Pete was there with me, along with two people I hadn't met before but who came highly recommended. Daniel Brooks, the attorney, was younger than I expected. Maybe mid-40s, with eyes that looked like they'd seen every trick in the book. He didn't just take the case for the money. He told me his own father had been targeted by a predatory second wife and an older brother. He had lost his father because he hadn't realized what was happening until it was too late, and he was determined not to let that happen to me. Beside him was Sarah Bennett, a private investigator who specialized in elder abuse and financial crimes. She called what I was experiencing textbook predatory behavior. We spent the afternoon going over every shred of evidence I had managed to gather. We laid out the photos of the fake IDs, the notebook with my death timeline, and the recording of Lily's heartbreaking confession. We also looked at the photos of my slashed tires and the anonymous text message that had followed. Sarah's face grew darker with every detail. She told me plainly that this wasn't just a financial scam. It was a criminal escalation with a clear intent to cause me physical harm. For the next 2 weeks, Sarah worked in the shadows. She ran surveillance on Mark and Elena, and what she found made my stomach turn. They weren't just living a quiet life. They were meeting with rough-looking men in parking lots and dingy diners. Sarah discovered that Mark had been making large, unexplained cash withdrawals from accounts I didn't even know existed. They had even rented a secret storage unit on the outskirts of town, likely to hide assets they planned to take once I was out of the way. The turning point came when Sarah managed to plant a small audio device near their back porch. She played back a snippet of a recording that chilled me to the bone. I heard Elena's voice, cold, clipped, and devoid of any humanity, saying, "We need to move faster. He knows too much now." Then I heard my son, my only child, respond quietly, "I'll handle it." Daniel Brooks looked at me with a somber expression. "We can't wait for them to come to you," he said. "We need a recorded confession in front of witnesses to build a case they can't wriggle out of." He explained that we would set a trap at my house, but he warned me it would be dangerous. If they felt cornered, there was no telling how they might react. Pete looked me in the eye and asked if I was sure I wanted to go through with it. I thought about Lily, how she had to pretend to be asleep every night just to stay safe. For her, I said, I'd risk anything. On Thursday afternoon, I picked up the phone and called Mark. When he answered, I kept my voice low, making it sound tired and defeated. "Son, I've been thinking," I said, pausing for effect. "Maybe you're right. Maybe I'm just getting too old to handle things on my own." I invited them over for dinner on Friday night, telling him I was ready to talk about transferring the house into their names. There was a beat of silence as I felt Mark calculating the profit. Then his voice came back, suddenly bright and eager, that fake warmth I had learned to loathe. "Friday works, Dad. That's really generous of you. We'll be there at 7-inch. I hung up the phone and looked at my team. The bait was set. I stood at the stove that Friday evening, stirring a pot of Rose's signature pot roast, forcing my hands to remain steady. It took every ounce of the military discipline I'd learned decades ago to keep from shaking. As the savory scent of slow-cooked beef and roasted vegetables filled the kitchen, memories of better days flashed through my mind. Teaching Lily how to cast a line from the boat and hearing Rose's laughter echoing across the marsh. Those were the things I was fighting for. Those were the memories Mark and Elena wanted to pave over with greed. An hour earlier, Sarah had finished installing the high-tech surveillance gear. The cameras and microphones were hidden so professionally that even I, knowing they were there, couldn't spot them. Under Florida law, since it was my own home and I had given full consent, every second of what was about to happen would be a perfectly legal recording. "We're getting a clean feed, Silas." Pete's voice crackled softly through the tiny earpiece nestled in my ear. "Video and audio are streaming perfectly to the van. You're good to go." Outside, Daniel and Sarah were hunkered down in a nondescript vehicle 2 houses away, and a squad of local police was staged just 2 blocks out, waiting for my signal to move. Most importantly, Lily was safe at Pete's house, far away from the storm that was about to break in my dining room. At exactly 7 o'clock, headlights swept across my driveway. Mark and Elena stepped out of the truck, dressed as if they were headed to a Sunday service. Mark wore a crisp button-down, and Elena looked the picture of elegance in a burgundy dress, even carrying a bottle of expensive wine. "Hey, Dad," Mark said with a wide, warm smile that reached everywhere except his eyes. "Thanks for having us over." I played my part perfectly, shaking his hand and even giving Elena a polite nod as I ushered them inside. We sat through an hour of agonizing small talk over drinks, the weather, the neighbors, and old stories from Mark's high school days. I kept my voice light and easy, hiding the fire burning in my chest. "Where's Lily?" Elena asked, her eyes darting around the room. "She's at a sleepover at a friend's house," I replied casually. I figured this conversation about the future should stay between us adults. I saw her shoulders relax instantly. The flicker of relief in her eyes told me everything I needed to know. To her, no child meant no witness and no obstacles. The dinner was delicious, a bittersweet reminder of my wife's cooking, but I could barely taste it. As we finished the meal, the air in the room grew thick and tense. I set down my fork and looked at them both. "I've been thinking a lot about getting older," I said quietly, reaching for a folder on the side table. "I want to simplify things. You're my only son, Mark, and the house and my assets should stay in the family." I slid the property transfer documents across the table. Mark's hands actually trembled with greed as he opened the folder. "Dad, are you sure?" Elena leaned forward, her mask of concern slipping just enough to reveal the raw hunger for the $650,000 the house was worth. "This is so generous, Silas. You won't regret this decision." "No," I said, my voice turning as steady as stone. "I don't think I will." I let the silence stretch out, letting them bask in the thought that they had finally won. Then, slowly, I pulled my phone out of my pocket and slammed it face up on the table. The screen was glowing with a crystal-clear photo of the notebook I'd found under the boat. The pages detailing my daily routines, my medications, and the timeline for my death. "Before we sign anything," I said, my eyes locking onto theirs, "I need you both to explain exactly what this is." The color drained from Mark's face instantly, and the room went deathly silent. The silence in the dining room was so heavy I could hear the ticking of the clock in the hallway. Mark's face drained of every drop of color, leaving him looking like a ghost. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. It was Elena who found her voice first, though it wasn't the sweet, melodic tone she'd used all evening. It was sharp and jagged. "Where did you get that?" she demanded, her eyes fixed on the glowing phone screen. "I found it exactly where Lily told me to look," I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline surging through me. "In the old tool chest in the workshop." Mark stood up so quickly his chair screeched across the hardwood floor. "Dad, let me explain. It's not what it looks like." "Then tell me exactly what it is, Mark," I countered, cutting him off. "Explain why you and your wife have been mapping out my daily medications and my walks in the marsh, so you could stage a tragic accident and take my money." Elena's eyes flashed with a predatory light. "This is insane, Silas. Mark, your father is clearly having another episode. He's imagining things." Is that right, Elena Vance? I said, using the name from her Arizona past. Or should I call you Elena Thorne or Elena Miller? I know about the executive in Arizona who fell down the stairs 6 months after you married him. I know exactly what you do. Her mask didn't just slip. It shattered completely. The warmth and the concerned daughter-in-law act were gone, replaced by a cold, calculating stillness that was far more terrifying. I turned my gaze to Mark. And you, my own son, you wrote down when I'm alone. You noted my blood pressure pills. You were helping her. Mark crumbled right there at the table. His hands were shaking so hard he had to grip the edge of the wood to stay upright. Dad, you don't understand. We're drowning, he choked out. The debts from the business, the loans, we're about to lose everything. Mark, shut up, Elena hissed, but the dam had already burst. We didn't want to hurt you, Pop, Mark pleaded, his voice sounding like a desperate child's. We were going to make it look like an accident. You've lived a full life, and we would have used the money to give Lily everything. She would have been taken care of. The betrayal felt like a physical blow to my gut. Take care of Lily? I shouted, slamming my hand on the table. You've turned her into a terrified prisoner in her own home. She's 9 years old, and she spent months pretending to sleep so she wouldn't hear her own father planning to kill her grandfather. Elena's voice was like ice. Lily will adjust. Children are resilient. She would have moved on. She then looked around the room, her eyes snapping to the corners of the ceiling and then back to the phone on the table. Her face twisted with a sudden, sharp realization. You're recording us, she said, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. You old fool. You set us up. She lunged across the table, her fingers clawing for the phone, but Mark grabbed her arm. Elena, don't. It's over. At that exact moment, the front door and the back door burst open simultaneously. The heavy thud of tactical boots on my front porch echoed through the house as the local police burst through both the front and back doors. Elena wrenched her arm free from Mark's grip and scrambled toward the kitchen, but she didn't get far. Officers were already coming in from both sides, exactly as Pete and I had planned. Elena Vance, Mark Thorne, you're both under arrest, the lead officer announced, his voice booming and firm. This is a setup, Elena screamed, her face contorting with a rage that finally showed her true self to the world. He's an old man, he's confused. This is entrapment. The officer didn't even blink. You just confessed on high-definition video, ma'am, inside his private residence with his full consent. That isn't entrapment. It's a closed case. While they were handcuffing Elena, I turned my gaze to Mark. He stood there as if he were carved from stone, his face a sickly shade of gray. When they finally led him toward the door, he stopped and looked at me, his eyes brimming with tears. Dad, I'm so sorry, he whispered, his voice barely audible over the crackle of police radios. I stared at him. The son I'd taught to ride a bike, the boy I'd cheered for at every baseball game, the man I'd loved with everything I had, and I felt my heart finally shatter into 1,000 pieces. No, Mark, I said, my voice heavy with a grief that would never truly go away. You're only sorry you got caught. His face crumpled, and they led him out into the night before he could say another word. The house went deathly quiet after the sirens faded away. Elena was still protesting as they put her in the car, but inside, it was just me and Daniel. He put a steady hand on my shoulder. Silas, you did it. It's finally over. I tried to nod, but my legs suddenly turned to water. I sank back into my chair, shaking so hard I thought I might actually fall apart. Outside, the red and blue lights swept across the dining room walls, flashing over the cold, untouched pot roast on the table. The property transfer documents were scattered across the floor, worthless scraps of paper that had almost cost me my life. My son was gone, likely for a very long time, but Lily was safe, and that was the only thing that kept me breathing. 3 months later, the world felt like a different place. The legal process had been swift. Given the mountain of evidence, the notebook, the recordings, and Elena's history, both of them were facing long prison sentences. More importantly, I was granted full and permanent legal custody of Lily. We started her in therapy immediately. At first, those sessions were incredibly difficult. She barely spoke a word and would often just stare at the floor. But week by week, I started to see the light coming back into her eyes. The nightmares became less frequent, and she stopped jumping at every little noise in the house. One afternoon, I walked into her room and saw a new drawing on her desk. For months, her pictures had been dark and scribbled with black crayons. This one was full of bright yellow sunshine, colorful flowers, and a small boat bobbing on a brilliant blue bay. And then, I heard it, the sound of her laughter ringing through the hallway as she chased our new golden retriever pup. That sound filled the empty corners of the house in a way I'd forgotten was possible. Our days found a new, peaceful rhythm. Mornings were for pancakes and talking about school. I found myself treasuring the simple act of watching her wave to me from the school steps, her smile wide and easy once again. We were reclaiming our lives, one day at a time, from the shadow that had almost swallowed us whole. 3 months after the night the red and blue lights flickered across my dining room walls, life began to feel steady again. The legal proceedings moved with a grim efficiency. With the mountain of evidence we had gathered, Mark and Elena were both sentenced to long terms in prison. The courts officially granted me full and permanent custody of Lily. While justice had been served in a courtroom, the real victory was happening inside the walls of my home. Lily's healing didn't happen overnight. At first, she was a quiet, fragile thing who barely spoke during her therapy sessions. But slowly, the shadows began to lift. The dark, fearful scribbles in her sketchbook were replaced by vibrant drawings of flowers and boats under a bright yellow sun. And then, one rainy Tuesday morning, I heard it, the sound of her genuine laughter echoing through the kitchen. It was a sound I had feared was lost forever. Our lives found a beautiful, simple rhythm. Every morning, Lily stands on a wooden stool at the counter, helping me pour pancake batter while we talk about her plans for the school day. I've come to treasure the school drop-offs, watching her wave to me with a wide, easy smile as she bounces up the steps with her backpack. The dining table is no longer a place of suffocating silence. It's now her homework station, where she spreads out her books while I hum along to the radio and cook dinner. We also reclaimed the workshop and the boat. The very same boat that had hidden a dark secret now carries us out onto the bay every weekend, where we reclaim the peace that was almost stolen from us. I realized through this that family isn't just about blood. It's about who shows up and stays when things get dark. Pete stops by once a week to teach Lily how to play chess, and Daniel and Sarah check in regularly to make sure we're thriving. Even the neighbors, who I had distanced myself from during my grief over Rose, have become a circle of support. I've also started working with Daniel's nonprofit, visiting senior centers once a month. I talk to other grandfathers and grandmothers about financial exploitation, how to spot the red flags, and how to ask for help. Sometimes Lily comes with me, shyly handing out her colorful drawings to the residents, who absolutely adore her. One Sunday evening, as we sat on the boat watching the sun dip below the horizon in a blaze of gold and pink, Lily looked up at me. "Grandpa, do you still think about Dad?" she asked softly. I took a slow, deep breath. "I do, sweetheart. I think about who he used to be before he made those choices. Do you think he ever really loved us?" Her voice was small. I pulled her close, resting my chin on her head. "I think he chose a path that led him away from that love, honey. But look around us. We have people who truly care, and most importantly, we have each other." She hugged me tight, and in that moment, I knew we were going to be okay. Looking back, I realized how close I came to losing everything. I'm sharing this grandpa story because I want others to learn from my mistakes. I ignored the warning signs for far too long. I made excuses for Mark's distance and Elena's coldness because I didn't want to believe the truth. I almost paid for that denial with my life. If you feel in your gut that something is wrong, trust that instinct. Don't isolate yourself. I thought being a protector meant handling it alone, but I needed Pete, Daniel, and my whole community to survive. Getting older doesn't make you a burden or a victim. It makes you wise, provided you're willing to use that wisdom to fight back. Most of all, I see God's hand in all of this. He gave a 9-year-old girl the courage to slip me that note, and he put people like Pete in my life at exactly the right moment. Faith doesn't mean you won't walk through the darkness, but it ensures you won't face the shadows alone. If you see these signs or hear stories like mine, don't stay silent. Stay connected, stay vigilant, and never stop protecting the ones you love. We have come through the hardest days imaginable, and now, finally, we are free to move forward together.